For the visionary composer, keyboardist, philosopher, bandleader, and intergalactic traveler known as Sun Ra, the planet was a way station, and music was both a vessel and a channel. Throughout his earthly career, which roughly spanned the second half of the last century, he engaged an impossibly broad-spectrum sweep of musical ideas, big band swing and bebop, along with future sound electronics and ancient African rhythms, funk and free jazz, psychedelic grooves and bizarro doo-wop, and much, much more. It was a universal music, attests George Clinton, the Parliament funkadelic mastermind with an intergalactic angle of his own. There's no box you can put it in, except that it makes you feel good. Sun Ra was born Herman Poole Blount in Birmingham, Alabama on May 22, 1914. Years later, he would insist otherwise, that his journey began elsewhere, on Saturn or some other cosmic plane. The claim was often taken quite literally, thus earning Sun Ra a reputation of an eccentric, if not a madman. But Sun Ra never actually insisted on being from Saturn in a concrete sense. Instead, his mythic identity and claims of originating from Saturn were metaphorical, and that he had been called by cosmic beings to speak through music to a world that needed him. For Ra, the alien was a metaphor for being different and alone. As Sun Ra described his life in an interview when he was 76, "I left my family, I left my friends, I left everything to be me, because I knew I was not like them. I'm not like nobody else. I'm alone on this planet." He did claim, however, to have been to outer space after experiencing an alien abduction in 1936, even though he seems not to have mentioned the experience to anyone before 1953. Sun Ra recounts how the spacemen asked him to come with them, and he was lifted up in a column of light. "It looked like a giant spotlight shining down on me, and I call it transmolecularization. My whole body was changed into something else." He ended up on Saturn, where the aliens told him that when it looked like the world was going into complete chaos, he should speak to the people, and the world would listen. Swed interprets Sun Ra's alien abduction story as an act of personal mythology that connected his past and future into one coherent narrative. Whether Sun Ra really believed that he had an abduction experience, or whether the story was the result of his artistic creation, the story does have that effect, connecting pieces of his life into an understandable, mythic whole. For almost 50 years, he evaded questions, forgot details, left false trails, and talked in allegories and parables, writes John Swed in his biography, "Space is the Place, The Lives and Times of Sun Ra." Film producer Jim Newman approached Sun Ra in the early 70s about making a half-hour documentary of the Arkestra for PBS. And, in true Sun Ra fashion, a simple documentary soon turned into a science fiction, blaxploitation feature-length film. Space is the Place saw a limited release in New York and San Francisco in 1974, as did the accompanying soundtrack of the same name. The film's storyline begins with Ra returning to Earth, Oakland to be specific, after visiting a distant planet. Ra expresses his desire to relocate the black population of America to this other world, using music as the portal. His main obstacle in achieving this goal is the Overseer, a pimp with supernatural powers who currently controls the black population with drugs, sexual temptation, and indifference. Ra faces off against the Overseer in a series of duels, and eventually beats him when, at the end of the film, Ra conducts a concert to spread his message. But the surreal film and its convoluted plot failed to impress a mainstream audience, and it was pulled just a couple showings after its release. Growing up, he was bright and intense, a voracious reader, a quick study, self-taught, sharpened by occasional instruction. Family members recall Blount as being an excellent student, but having little to no friends. But Sonny, as he was called, also suffered from a deep alienation. In adolescence, he developed a testicular hernia that caused both physical agony and a sense of shame. He felt different, a breed apart. In 1936, Ra was attending the Alabama State Agricultural and Mechanical Institute for Negroes and becoming increasingly withdrawn from his peers. He was spending countless hours at the library researching religions when he had his great epiphany. As he described it, two men from space brought him with them to Saturn to inform him that there was going to be great trouble in schools and that he should not continue with his education. They told Ra that when the world was going into complete chaos, then and only then would he speak, and the world would listen. Upon his return to Earth, Ra discontinued his education and realized the voice in which to deliver his message was his music. Music would serve as the portal between Earth and space, a bridge to galaxies where humankind, specifically the black population, could seek opportunities they were not given on this planet. He became Sun Ra, legally, Lasani R. Ra, during a momentous stretch in Chicago, from the mid-1940s to the early 60s. He was a fairly well-regarded musician by this time, having worked with the illustrious Fletcher Henderson Orchestra and having led a more exploratory group he called the Space Trio. As Sun Ra, he deepened his cosmic focus and began assembling musicians for marathon rehearsals. Ra was known for holding a tight rein over his collective of musicians, making the arkestra practice anywhere from 8 to 12 hours a day in a house in New York City's East Village. In an effort to combat high rent, as well as to establish their unity as an artist collective, the musicians lived together. The house would eventually become Sun Studios, where Ra and the orchestra self-recorded and produced their own albums through Ra's label, Saturn Records. Throughout the 60s, Ra cut more records each year than most artists complete in a lifetime, the only thing limiting his production being financial restraints. From writing, composing, and playing on the records, to producing them and even hand-painting many of the album covers, Ra controlled every element of the recording process. When they weren't practicing or recording, Ra spent part of each day teaching the orchestra his philosophy on the limitations of life on Earth, as well as extolling the opportunities that lie in outer space. For Sun Ra, music was the tool that could fix the sorry state of the world through creating positive vibrations. He thought that music, especially his space music, was the tool to comprehend the meaning of the impossible and every other enigma. While Sun Ra was by no means the only one to use space imagery and space themes in his music, this utopian feature, the genuine belief in the power of his music to create a better world, sets him apart from other jazz artists of his time. Sun Ra's techniques made an impact locally, especially on musicians who entered his orbit. One of these was Maurice White, a drummer and vocalist later to become the driving force behind Earth, Wind and Fire. "I was really knocked out," says White of his first exposure to Sun Ra's music. "The originality and the way he utilized musicians was so startling, and the whole thing that went along with it, all the esoteric stuff relative to the planets. The combination of Egyptology and cosmic utopia would be a trademark of Earth, Wind and Fire, as would a series of elaborate stage shows, complete with giant pyramids and spacesuits." Sun Ra made his biggest sonic strides in New York, during a 7-year stretch that coincided with the tumultuous heyday of free jazz. He had a pronounced impact on John Coltrane, the saxophonist held in highest esteem by proponents of the new thing. It was hardly an accident that Coltrane, in his latter years, recorded songs with titles like Sunship, Sunstar, and Stellar Regions. One of his final albums was Interstellar Space, an immortal duet record with Philadelphia-born drummer Rashid Ali, consisting of movements named after planets. A musician-poet? A messenger from another world? I can't say just what he was exactly, but I can say that all these things he felt called to do were an earnest attempt to change the world for the better. Through his persona, Sun Ra sought to build a black identity that embraced ancient African mythology, rather than accepting the definitions of blackness that were commonly in use in his time. Sun Ra pioneered a sound that extended beyond what was known on Earth during his time. But space is a vast place, and he left the door open to many uncharted territories. Ra understood that Earth isn't diverse enough for everyone. With his nearly 200 albums, he did his part to provide a portal for the outcasts of this planet, those who think differently and perhaps don't quite belong here. This is Aaron from One Track Jazz. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe.